Welcome back to the 11th edition of Tech Sparks. I hope you're having fun. I hope your story is helping you network and learn everything about entrepreneurship. We are going to get into the fintech panel straight away. Let me give a little bit about an introduction, okay? As we get used to the new reality of our lives, digital adoption has seen a massive uptick with e-payments and lending has also picked up. Fintechs are finding themselves in a very sweet spot at this point of time. The current situation has given them impetus to get into financial inclusion, increase the financial literacy in India's underserved communities. However, there's a lot more room for data-led personalization, and services can improve, and all of them are investing in user experience at this point of time. Okay, the number of fintechs that have been handling confidential data of businesses and individuals has also increased. So regulation becomes important, compliance becomes important. So what are they doing with this massive amount of data during the COVID is something that you can learn from this panel. Then we can also talk about the challenges that they faced from a regulatory environment and how they waded through that and have become stronger and better companies. Okay, you're also going to talk about their expansion plans. You will understand that how these entrepreneurs think when it comes to scaling up, and so the panel is rightly titled Digital India Dreams, Minimizing Risk, Maximizing Returns. So let me introduce you to my panelists. I have Ravish Naresh, the founder of KhataBook. Ravish is a serial entrepreneur, of course, having co-founded Kite.ai and Housing.com before KhataBook. I have Lizzie Chapman, co-founder and CEO of Zest Money. Before co-founding Zest Money, Lizzie worked in Goldman Sachs and as well as the Wellcome Trust as an investment manager and was also with DBS. I also have Sampath Swain, the CEO and co-founder of InstaMojo. Sampath worked with ITC and Godrej and founded Vana.mo and also deals for you before he began his entrepreneurial journey with InstaMojo. We have Archit Gupta with us. Archit is the founder and CEO of ClearTax. Prior to setting up ClearTax, he worked at Data Domain Inc., which was later acquired by EMC. He's an alumnus of IIT Guwahati and University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Archit. And I have Rahul Kothari, who's the Chief Business Officer at Razorpay. Rahul, as a CBO, is responsible for growing the company globally as a full-stack B2B fintech platform. I've got Sumant Narayanan, the business head, India, Akamai. Sumant has been in Akamai for a decade. He's been in various roles like travel, OTT, BFSI, fintech, and edtech in this company. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Good to see you, everybody. So let me just go straight away into the questions, guys. We talk about India, tier 3, India, tier 2, India, tier 4. What's happening with financial inclusion? Perhaps, Ravish, you could kick it off. What's happening from a KhataBook perspective? And this question is open to all of you, please.
Sure. So at KhataBook, more than 60% of our users are from tier 2 and beyond. So what we have seen is post-pandemic, there has been an accelerated trend in the smaller towns to adopt these digital tools to make their businesses, more efficient, and more so because in these times, cash flow is the hardest hit, and that is what exactly KhataBook is solving. And we've definitely seen an uptick post-COVID. So we're roughly at 2x our pre-COVID levels in terms of overall transactions and everything. So definitely we've seen an uptrend in digitization, especially from the smaller towns.
Okay, in your case, Lizzie, I mean, do you see an uptick in smaller towns in terms of purchases and what's happening in terms of financial inclusion there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always been our core focus, actually. Credit cards are kind of falling off the trees in most big cities. But when you go outside of that, that's where you can really add value to someone's life by creating affordability solutions. So we've always had that focus. 78% of our applications come from tier 2 and beyond. And I think the most interesting thing for us has been how resilient that part of the country is. And we always say this, especially when we talk to investors, that, you've got to understand India as like 20 countries in one, all with very different economic drivers and behavior drivers. But that's been especially apparent during the pandemic. We had a moratorium in lending, and you will see vastly divergent moratorium results from different lenders. And I would posit that a lot of that is to do with the geographical exposure that they have. So we had really, really low moratorium opt-in, really fast bounce back. And that's actually because we found a lot of these smaller towns and cities could get back on their feet faster, and consumer demand is back to normal. So very encouraging signs.
Yeah. Sampath, the last 6 months, India's gone through very tough times. But these sellers, the small town guys, were very resilient, right? Your thoughts from Instamoja?
Yeah, pretty much the same. The only highlight for us is we turned cash flow positive in June, which
Nice.
honestly was not plan A, B, or C. So that happened. Pretty much most of the metrics are around 2x. Some of the metrics are more than 2x, which led to the profitability status. One other thing we kind of had a view, but it kind of getting played out is more and more tier 2, tier 3 markets obviously are joining platform like ours. We consistently believe that in the short term, they will consistently become more of a MAU driver, and hopefully over a period of time, they will become more ARPU driver. So for the time being, we have to satisfy ourselves thinking that more and more will join. They may not lead to a lot of ARPU, but over a period of next few years or so, I guess some of those MAU will convert into rather ARPU. They'll convert to ARPU from MAU. Yeah.
Sampath, I want to stick with you there. I mean, what is the addressable market when you say fintech in India today?
Depends which research you're reading at.
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? So India is another thing is there's no data, real data where somebody can pinpoint, say, X number of people have used or use consistently.
Yeah, so the way we look at it, let me kind of give a quick minute overview on that. We look at how which all channels merchants are joining the internet. So there are obviously channels like Google Shopping and Google Home and so on and so forth. So they're joining through Google platforms, and then there are social media platforms, plenty of them around. Then there are Sulekhas to Just Dial to Intermarts of the world, and they're the marketplaces.
Yes.
And the last but not least, and everything is going from left to right, as I mentioned, right? And the last is when merchants are actually creating their own brand websites, brand destinations, right? And together, our estimate is it's on the top order is very difficult to tell you, but I think the minimum is at least 12 to 15 million merchants who are digitally connected to all these 5 channels, right? So that's how we look at it. At least 15 million, 15. Merchants. Obviously, press and everybody kind of talks about 63 to 67 million.
Yeah.
I'll take it with open arms, but I'll stick with 15 million at the base counter. Yeah.
That's okay. Maybe perhaps they're also including SMBs speaking on their behalf, but yeah, that 63 million number gets quoted.
This is so our data shows that this is primarily micro entrepreneurs, typically people who are self-employed, sitting at home and bedroom doing business to up to 10 people. I'm guessing folks who are on the panel, they can talk about folks beyond 10 people.
Yeah.
We want to kind of focus on micro enterprises who are less than 10 people. So for us, that's 15 million is the TAM or SAM for us.
Fantastic. Ravi, should you agree with that? Before I just move on to Rahul, Ravi, should you agree with that number, or is that the addressable market from the SMBs? And Lizzie, on the consumer side, it must be really high, right? Let's talk about that in a second. Go on, Ravi.
So for the Kirana and the shopkeeper market that we're addressing, most studies show that there are around 50 to 60 million estimated small shopkeepers.
Yeah.
We have a 9 million monthly active merchants on Khatabook platform already. So I would love for the market to be just 15 million, then they can have a very good market there. But then I think there's a lot of, given our growth trend, I feel there is a lot of depth remaining. And given how CACs are still, I would say, consistent, that clearly shows there is depth. So I think definitely I all Sampath said, there are studies all around, numbers are all around. So it's anywhere from 20 to 60, like we don't know, honestly.
Oh, but anywhere, but that's quite a huge distribution.
That is true. Another factor there is like how much of that is even addressable, like how much of that come online. So there are just too many layers on that. So I think only time will tell in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Lizzie, if that's the number that we have, then these sellers will be selling a huge number of customers or consumers, right? And that's a big market for you anyway. And so would you say 100 million people have availed some kind of Zest Money kind of offers and they've bought things?
Not yet, but they should. Coming soon. No, so we think there's about 300 million households in this country that are not yet being served by a formal credit solution, but they're obviously borrowing, from somewhere informally. And more importantly, they actually do have the cash flow to service a small ticket loan product. The problem is that most banks' unit economics mean that they need the loan to be like 1 lakh plus. And what we've identified is most of those 300 million households have a credit need of like 30 to 40,000 a year max, right? That's it. They just want to buy like a TV, an air conditioner, something like that. And so actually the need of the hour is what we do, which is basically a really, really digital, light, easy form of credit. Very similar to what SMEs need, contextual, linked to transactions. But yeah, we think the market is huge, probably the biggest in the world for these pay later or contextual credit products.
No, that's fantastic. Rahul, I mean, that's where your neo banking platform, and perhaps Sampath can also talk about it. What are the loan sizes that a typical SMB needs, and which you have that segment also from your neo banking platform, right? Rahul, go on.
Yeah, sure. So from an overall neobanking perspective, we primarily, so there are two different businesses, neobanking and the capital through which we provide loans. Neobanking is primarily for the merchants who want to do online B2B banking with us, which is more in terms of payouts, in terms of payroll, etc. Loans is primarily from the capital business perspective. Right now, the way we are giving loans is mostly based on the transaction volumes that they have done with us, which would be kind of somewhere in the range of 5 to 7 days of the working capital loans, which can range up to somewhere from 1 lakh to 10 lakh for per merchant. So that's the broadly size of the loan. But I think in terms of the overall number of merchants and the addressable market share or the market, I think different ways to look at it. The way Lizzie talked about was mostly the consumer centric.
Yes.
And what Ravish talked about was mostly primarily, I think, a lot of merchants whose primary business is into the offline space, but they also want to do some of the online transactions or online lending as well. So that's a number somewhere, I think, close to 60, 70 million. And I think what probably, we think is the merchants who have, say, primarily online space or maybe a significant portion of the business happening online, that might be a range of 10 million. And from where we look at the entire 10 million from Visa-based perspective is a potential target market for the credit.
Okay, and it's interesting. Sampath, Rahul just said that perhaps these guys need working capital. But Rahul, correct me if I'm wrong. 10 lakhs is the amount of working capital loan that they need per month.
So it ranges from about, say, a couple of lakhs to 10 lakhs right now.
Okay, interesting. Sampath, you brought in the point of micro entrepreneurs in our country, and Ravish, you can add to that after Sampath tells us his thoughts. I mean, I thought that the average working capital size was 30,000 a week or something for these micro entrepreneurs because these are all traders. But what is the average? Is there an average to this, Sampath?
Well, I can only talk about how we see at InstaMojo.
Yeah,
right?
please. I'd love your thoughts from your perspective.
Yeah, so what we see on the platform is at a structural level, micro businesses, like individual business to up to 10 people. Their requirements are quite different than what the average in the market is. So the requirement is we want very bite-sized loan, but very frequently. Like if there is a bank or institution which can lend them every 3 days, 10,000 rupees, they're sorted, right? And unfortunately, the market, that is exactly what is not available. And that is the space we want to kind of fill up with our first credit product, Sachet Loan, and a few others that we are testing out, right? Our average loan ticket is about 10 to 12,000 rupees. Give it for 3 days, right? So our idea is, hey, can I give you like 52, every week there should be a loan. So there should be 52 loans a year worth about 10 to 20,000 rupees, right? Other than giving you a 5 to 10 lakh. I think the average size that I've came across from the NBFC is about 7 lakh is the average ticket size in India from SME perspective. But when you talk about micro entrepreneurs, our understanding is about 10 to 12,000 every week is kind of decent enough for them to kind of work in the
That is so fascinating. So if Lizzie says it, it's like, it's like several countries, but it's also several personalities in this financial journey also.
Yeah, that's why each one of us will survive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole deal. If you entrepreneurs are watching this, don't write off fintech. Okay, we are still scratching the surface. Ravish, on Sampath's point, it's true, right? Go on.
That is true. Yeah. Although, that said, we haven't started lending, so yet to know what the exact number would be. But our early estimations are fairly in line with what Sampath said.
Okay. coming down to Archit, you listen to all of them. All these guys need to file taxes in the end of the day.
I'm expecting
Right?
Archit to sum it up by saying that all figures are
Please
wrong.
sign up with me. Archit, your thoughts, please, on what's happening, smaller towns, and with all these guys who just commented, what do you see happening in the market?
Right. So broad numbers, I think, because we can from the tax data stuff is like 12 million businesses registered in GST, which is like broadly folks who have transactions more than like INR 20 lakh or 40 lakh contextually, and about 30 million businesses registered into the income taxes. So broadly, those would be in the formal economy.
That 30,000 was this year.
30 million.
30 million
for the
now,
last
30 million,
for the
30
last
million.
couple of years, right?
Okay.
So broadly that ballpark. So growth is like about 10% YOY, right? So basically what we are looking at is like I think hard to validate the 50-60 million, but like in the sense of like the after that like the revenue threshold may fall very sharply. We are talking about like INR 3-4 lakh rupees of income, right, annually.
Yeah.
Right. That's like below that, like as Sampath said, like the monetization.
That's real
potential.
India, man. 3 lakhs per merchant per year. No, that's the
Per
net
year.
you're talking per year.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So I think like so it falls very sharply, and the long tail is very long. So and it's very very long tail, right? So I think like the monetization question which Sampath raised, I think is relevant. I think there will be very strong DAU, MAU drivers, but from a monetization perspective, there's a journey there. And the second part, which was mentioned, like I think the overall trends, like what we are observing, like especially like more recently with the sale events, right? The Diwali sale events. There's a lot of traffic. All the core platforms drive to us for GST registrations, company incorporation, and so on and so forth. So very sharp uptick from tier 2, tier 3 towns on that. In terms of the GST taxes, also like reasonable recovery in the tier 2, tier 3 towns. So I'm just giving you GDP macro from our data and like what we see. We see about like 10% of all of India. So I think I can just correlate that. Like so broadly, I think like strongly as Lizzie said, like the lockdowns brought the sharp downwards trend, and then as the lockdowns eased up, like it came back. But we have not seen secular growth across. As a platform, we are growing very fast because of the digitization trend. But I'm not seeing like revenues climbing disproportionately in these towns and cities.
What do you mean by secular growth?
Like secular growth because of digitization. Like we have seen people moving from like what we compete with, like would be desktop products or like historically legacy products, or we'd be competing with like physical services, right? Like a big four, like a Deloitte or a KPMG would be giving you service, but now like you're digitizing all of that, or you're moving to the cloud. So I think like cloud adoption is going up. So that is the secular trend line which is driving our business. But when I look at the businesses themselves or the consumers themselves, there is no secular growth in their income. So I think like the bounce back happened, but like it's not like as if incomes are going very fast or the revenues are growing very fast. So I think overall like the economy continues to be like in stress. I think like at a very macro level. So I think like fintechs will continue to grow. I think financial services, technology, digitization. Because like digitization, we are seeing like secularly 2x growth on the platform, right? Everybody's talking about 2x growth here.
Correct.
Broadly, we are seeing that like across all our platforms, all our usage, the numbers are in that zone, right? But the revenue of these underlying businesses is not growing that fast. So I think like we are then pegged to GDP in that sense. So I think it'll take time to recover from that perspective.
Sure.
Okay, that's fantastic. Sumant, please go on. It must be music to your ears when these guys are expanding. That's where Akamai comes in and says, we can help you.
You were actually telling Archer that everyone needs to file taxes and they'll hopefully all go to ClearTax. I was just hoping that all this traffic comes to Akamai.
Wow, for sure.
I think the verdict is unanimous, right? I think there's a lot of upside. When you actually look at even the numbers, I think that right now we're looking at about 100 million transactions a day. I think all digital transactions put together. I think the target is to get to about 1 billion transactions in a particular day, right? So I think from our standpoint, I think the two things that we're building for, one is obviously scale and reach, and the other one is which is very unique to India in some sense, is the spiky nature of the traffic. So I'll take the scale first. Now, I mean, everyone's spoken about the huge potential in tier 2 and tier 3. And that's where I think we are building out a very distributed network. And as I said, we have almost like 300 POPs in this country, points of presence, to essentially get to that tier 2 and tier 3 and and deliver a consistent experience. So that's just purely on scale. The other thing, as I was saying, was spikiness. I mean, the simplest analogy, I think, for all the cricket-loving fans is, when there is a tense match and Dhoni walks in, and then within a split few seconds, you see like 3x, 4x number of people coming on a platform, right? And I think Archit was referring to the recent e-commerce festival. I think the big folks like Flipkart and Amazon, I think they did about like 3.5 billion over like 4 days. So that actually tells you like there are pockets where there is a huge amount of traffic that actually gets picked in. And that's where we're seeing a lot of organizations basically re-architecting their applications, both for scale and to handle the spiky nature of traffic.
Okay, that's really well said. Going back to Ravish, do you think, the merchants, right? I mean, how appreciative are they of this, of the speed of closure of, transactions? I mean, do they understand these things because anything that goes wrong, they'll say, why should I use technology, right? At the end of the day. So what are your thoughts on what is your experience with these small sellers?
100%. What we have seen is these simple software tools help them make their existing life a lot more efficient. We do automate a lot of their offline flows in terms of reminders, in terms of follow-ups that a simple tool like a SMS reminder can automate. What we have seen is, for example, if someone is lending, say, $10,000 in the market, with using such tools like Khatabook, their pending udhari comes down by like almost like a factor of half. So if you're earning 3-4 lakh rupees an annum, and a couple of lakhs comes back, that's almost equal to your annual cash flow. I mean, that's a huge amount of impact that a software tool can make. So and plus, what we have seen is, for example, in Bangladesh, a UN agency has copied Khatabook and released a mobile app called Tally Khata just because it's making so much impact. So I think there's no doubt in my mind, and even in the user's mind, that these tools, if built well, essentially help their lives. Yeah, for sure.
You should just go launch in Bangladesh as soon as possible, right? Sampath, Rahul, I mean, you talked about these 10 to 15 million SMBs, small businesses, micro entrepreneurs coming in. How many of these guys really appreciate technology? What is their consistent usage? And how many of them really file taxes? Do you get to know that? Because then Archit can also sign up with you.
Yeah. No, sure. I think most of the merchants which come to our platform is primarily because of technology. It's simply the ease of the integration for the payments gateway. It could be simply because we can take them live through payment links or payment pages. So primarily they come for the technology for ease of onboarding. Also, I think the very faster, I think almost the instantaneous onboarding that we can do for the merchant. And while I think it's one part of it, the second very important part of it is also how we make the overall payment transactions much more seamless. So I think one of your earlier questions was, again, the speed of some of these transactions, does it matter? So at scale, when you look at it, actually, as the time per transaction goes up, you would see a lot of consumers dropping off, and therefore a loss of initial sale for a merchant. So some of these things I think really matter. And primarily this is because of the innovation in the onboarding, because of the innovation in the customer experience that these merchants come to us. Now, second, again, important part, which now we are seeing, which has become a good stickiness factor, though still I think we have to see it as a pull factor for new merchants, is the overall, the kind of credit that you can give to the merchant. We have very different kind of credits which merchant can get. It could be simple like on demand, right? For example, one day for a day, they need some few extra $1,000. It can be provided. It could be also kind of a recurring on demand kind of a loan or a credit card. Or some of those, I think somewhere the lending products also become a good sticky factor. Yeah. But again, here the technology and product is important, because the experience of taking a loan is very, very different than what a traditional financial institution would do. So yeah, definitely.
Sampath, over to you.
Well, nothing else to add. It's just that we have seen that so micro merchants behave very much like a global customer. I would not know much about SMEs, our Indian SME compared to a Chinese or a US SME.
Okay. When you say micro merchant, they're selling globally?
No, they're predominantly selling in India. Obviously, a part of them would be selling globally as well. What you've seen is consistently, they're obviously using various platforms that are available at the disposal, including InstaMojo. So I think their expectations are very much at the top-notch level. user experience, customer support, and so on and so forth. So essentially, the other trend on the consumer side we have started seeing is we are seeing a huge new slew of consumers coming in who are transacting with UPI. Right, and these are the consumers. I guess Lizzie also hinted they are not going to be a credit first consumer, credit card first consumers. UPI is kind of going to take a mainstay in their life when they're going to digitally transact. So we have literally seen our UPI volume on the platform literally 2.5x over the last 6 months, right? And then that's extraordinary given obviously UPI is also growing significantly. So I think the expectation is something that we have to continue keep our mind when you are thinking about existing as well as new products that you're going to launch for them. Yeah. So expectation is at the top-notch level, pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Yeah.
Okay, Archit, before I move to Lizzie, quickly, how many of these SMBs that these gentlemen tell me about, right, really file taxes? And how many of them come on board to file taxes?
Right. So I think like broadly those numbers like which I talked about, right? Like Vishal, 12 million on the GST side, like 30 million odd on the income tax side. And broadly, like I'll just talk about the technology adoption side. Like we have lakhs of like small, medium businesses and like chartered accounted firms who use the platform. I think the technology demand is like sometimes I've seen like they be more demanding than like the Titans or the Whistleries of the world who we serve at the other segment. So I think like they expect more uptime. They expect like, so their expectations are like they're used to like using YouTube, like Google Maps or what have you, right? WhatsApp, like which have very high availability time, very high customer backward experience. So I think overall, I think architecting for them is also like is of the similar nature. And the second part is like what was mentioned around spiky workloads, right? Tax tends to be extremely spiky. So I think like we see the same characteristics like for some of these workloads. So I think that was the other thought I thought I'd share.
No, that's a very interesting talk. The way you put it, if these guys are watching YouTube, I mean, they're certainly also going to influence a lot more people. That means a lot more people will have new credit history going forward, right? So I'm sure all of you, including Lizzie's company, are creating new credit history for consumers and businesses. Do you see that happening, Archit?
Right. So I think like as these businesses are like using anything digital, right? So it could be digital taxes, or it could be digital payments, or it could be digital records, or what have you, right? They are creating a footprint, right? Now that footprint is becoming underwritable. So by platforms like ours or Razorpay or Instamojo or Khatabook, etc. So I think like I think like the digital fintech work stream like will keep having like either proprietary system of record or like data sources or like non-proprietary systems. And so I think people will combine those public and private sources of data and then create underwriting models and issue credit. So I think like, and then the digitization advantage is you can issue credit for 3 days, 1 day, or like or 3 years or whatever you feel like. Which is like fundamentally different economics from traditional banks or whatever. So I think that we are seeing happening like on our platform also, like now we are facilitating SMBs to get access to credit, and we see like a lot of demand, for example, leading up to the Diwali season and what have you. So I think these kind of things like are coming up. So I think overall the digital footprint, as you said, as these SMBs generate more and given a very powerful smartphone in their pocket, I think the next.
That's true. That is true. Lizzie, coming down to you, I mean, here we spoke about technology. We spoke about, how, these small businesses are going to file taxes, new credit history and everything. All this is data. It's an opportunity for you also in terms of hyper-personalization. Are Indians ready for hyper-personalization? Because when we're talking about the market itself, we're still scratching the surface. So we're still a long way away. But how are you looking at personalized experiences and you're expanding your user base?
Yeah, we are obsessed with this at the moment, actually. So we've always been a bit different to some of the other lending fintechs in India. We don't depend on an app install. A lot of lending fintechs will make you download an app and then, permission, suck up all this data. And part of that was because, frankly, valuation and investors was all about like having all this data. And we never really agreed with that. We believe it belongs to the consumer and they should only give it to us if we can do something with it that's delightful, right? And joyful. Obviously, getting approved for a credit limit is quite delightful. But what we do now is we say, look, can we look at your transaction history? Can we analyze your previous transactions? And can we use that to make recommendations, not just about loans, but actually even products and shopping, right? So we might know when you next want an upgrade on your phone before you've even thought about it, and we could find you a deal from the right manufacturer with an embedded API, EMI in it. That is causing a lot of joy. And we're doing it in a way that's gonna, I think, really change the way credit is delivered. This whole kind of loyalty and reward system is very broken. We've done a lot of customer discovery, and even at the super high end, people are very disappointed with what they get from their credit card schemes. So there's a massive amount of improvement that can be done just by getting to know you better and personalizing the offers. Many of our customers just want pure discounts, right? They don't want a coffee at a nice coffee shop. They just want a discount, but they want a discount at the place they shop most, and they want it to be meaningful. So using data, we can personalize those discounts to give them like maximum value for money. The other thing we did is during the moratorium, we did a lot of customized collections kind of propaganda. So we picked different customers and said, you should pay this much because it will do this to your credit score. You should pay this much. You shouldn't do moratorium. You should, again, using data. And I think there's so much potential that traditional lenders are just ignoring to create delight.
We talked about the holiday season, right? And many of the people who order, how did you handle customer engagement when, a lot of the brands complained to me that, a lot of these e-commerce platforms, there were these counterfeit products going around, and, they had to rein in the merchants and all that. Is it tough? How do you use data to actually understand that your merchants are not selling counterfeit? Is that something that you work on?
Yeah, no, we do, of course. But it's tough on the marketplace model. So it's really important to also work directly with brands, to your point. So we have direct relationships with all the big OEMs, manufacturer brands, but it's a huge part of the kind of trust ecosystem. And this is also why we've been increasingly doing, omni-channel. A lot of brands like to have a physical and online relationship with the same customer.
Oh, that's a great answer. And personalization for you, Rahul, do you see personalization happening for your SMB segment? Are they ready for personalization, or they don't care as long as you serve them some money at some point of time? What's going on? You guys are giving banks a run for their money, man. I love this. I love this bunch here.
So sure, personalization, when we look from our perspective, it's really falls into two different buckets. One is definitely understanding our potential merchants to the next level of detail, so we can kind of really create really micro cohorts. For example, within the SME, within that the e-retail, which are the merchants which are doing, say, 10,000 rupees of transactions in a week versus a lakh versus a 10 lakh. So understanding those cohorts really well, and then trying to figure out what are the products which are best suited to them, how to build those, and how to kind of make sure there's adoption of those products. So I think that's one level of, in some ways, you can think of personalization. Second, the entire business which we are into is more about making sure we get the merchants through the payments model, and then see what are the relevant products that they can use at a different stage of the journey. For example, when they've just started off, probably a freelancer, they want to just use some payments linked to kind of accept payments from a potential customer. But as they evolve, at some point they would be becoming a registered merchant. Their needs would change. At some point, they will need their own kind of a web page. At some point, a plugin for selling through some shopping website. So as they evolve, what are different type of products that we can really position to them? So that's a kind of a life cycle looking within the micro cohorts. And second, I think in terms of personalization is, again, we have this entire neobanking platform and the lending, which you, I think, mentioned, Vishal. It's more about, I'll just give an example. Say if we know a edutech merchant who is doing transaction volume above a certain limit, we know through our models that they would be having this many employees, and therefore a payroll solution makes sense for them, because it's no longer they can really do it for themselves using the manual sheets and probably even the tax filing for their employees. So some of those, I think, the proactive suggestions to the merchants in terms of what is the right product that they can use over the life cycle, I think that's one, that's a part of the personalization. At the same time, I think the similar, I think, philosophy goes for lending as well.
Okay, somebody who's doing a lot of personalization is Ravish. I love this. I love his ads. He's got a Tamil person speaking English. He's got business made EG and all that going on. Ravish, how did you get into that kind of personalization, man? Very important. Do they see ads? These guys sit in their shop the whole day, or are you focusing their kids who will go tell their father, go check out Kata book?
No, so we've been fairly, I would say, our ad reach has been consistent in terms of like we've just adopted digital channels. Like we don't show ads on, say, for example, TV or anywhere offline. We track each and every conversion that happens through our ads. So which only happens on digital channels. And plus, in terms of personalization, I think we started that very early in terms of our journey when we saw that majority of our India is from the hinterland and is coming from across India. We localized fairly early on, and we also had we also saw that this is the first time internet user who's just started using a utility app. He's not used any apps like outside of WhatsApp or YouTube. So we wanted to be extremely local and extremely relevant in that context.
Sampath, the personalization to you, these guys, I mean, these micro entrepreneurs, they're fairly well informed, right? If you're saying some of your customers are serving global also.
It'll be wrong of
Go
me
on.
to say we don't do. Let me kind of add more context. So in fact, we have been doing it for donkey years, right? So we have something called a Pandit model, which is a reinforced learning model, which essentially, whenever a merchant signs up, we kind of figure out a potential versus intent across two different dimensions. To kind of add more context, what you have learned serving over 1 million micro entrepreneurs is intent trumps potential. Like if Vishal is hell-bent to kind of adopt digital, potential doesn't matter. Potential will come along intent. So we kind of craft their journey based on the intent versus potential.
Yes.
And then you have various services, as you know, that we kind of diverged from becoming a payment gateway in 2018. We become more of a shop store builder as well with them and providing all the logistics and lending services. So we have essentially seeing vast and clear adoption from merchants joining who used to join for payments are now saying, what, I need to buy a domain as well and kind of build my shop with payments, logistics, lending, very integrated as well. So obviously, and to kind of add more context, we see almost a double-digit percentage of our revenue directly getting impacted through this reinforced Pandit model, right? So it is there to stay. The other thing, reason why this is here to stay is because we really, in fact, most of us, if not all of us, are actually learning about merchants in a very new way than our predecessors have done it. Because most of them are joining internet for the first time for business purposes. They joined possibly Orkut 15 years back and then Facebook and so on and so forth. But using internet for doing trade and commerce is fairly new and novel for them. So their adoption and expectations are vastly different than how our predecessor had kind of maintained with them. So all our models have to be retuned and refined accordingly, right? And it's just a learning phase. I think nobody can clearly say they have figured it and nailed it down. So we obviously try to see, what if you kind of deploy a reinforced learning model, which is personalization model for us internally, how is it impacting the revenue, right? So fairly, so far so good. Let's see.
Yeah, Archit, in the old days, people came to see us say that, look, can you avoid, can you stop me from paying taxes? In your case, how does it work, man? I really am curious because you're New India. Does New India like paying taxes? I've been paying taxes for 20 years and I've not gained anything from it. So even I want to start avoiding paying taxes.
So I think so on the consumer side, right? Like millions of millennials use our platform, and like broadly, Vishal, what we observe is we recently launched our application for very personalized tax savings and investment, and we use we started with 3 signals, which is age, income, and the city actually they come from. That actually was geo actually. That was a very, very strong correlator to the cohort that they belong to. And as Lizzie said, it's 20 countries, not one country in that sense. And so and then we have added 40 more signals to the model. So we have now maybe 43 signals which help inform how this customer is going to behave. We even try to help them analyze what will their tolerance to risk be, what will their tolerance to various choices in their financial journey going to be, and how are they going to make choices, and can they make choices more easily, and can we bring down the cognitive burden because we understand a lot more about them, dependence, what have you, even where they work, right? If somebody is working from at TCS as a certain kind of behavior pattern versus somebody working at Google, and so those kind of things really inform the model, and people make very, very different choices, and so the kind of disposable income available and so on and so forth. So I think their personalization, we see tremendous value because the customers, themselves don't have intuition. As Lizzie said, like you are trying to predict when they'll buy a smartphone, right? In that sense. So in our case, like it's slightly more easier because it's like quarterly, like people have some goals and like people generally want to achieve them. Like annually, like tax saving some part, like some parts of investing, savings, and so on. Second, like on the business side, like we have a promise engine which on both sides, actually, consumer and business, like maximum savings. So there we take a lot of data science and data to the problem to save on taxes. So actually, like last year we have saved businesses $700 million in taxes.
Okay.
Like this was like last year on a flat savings of
You-
businesses
you-
on.
You save taxes.
Yeah,
That's
that,
nice.
that 700 million could be a fund of funds, right?
Yeah, man. Where did that go? I'm very curious.
It goes to the pocket of the business owner, right? Like it doesn't go to the government. Like so, it has to be like saved and like put to the. So
Absolutely.
I think like that's the key thing, right? Like the personalization angle, like can really lead to insights which otherwise a consulting person or a human being can give, but here technology can give and can do it like every day, every week. Because some of these things have
Well
to be
said.
done every week or every day, right? Like
Well said.
so this is like the major part, especially on the small medium business side, which cannot deploy experts, cannot afford it actually.
Sumant, coming to you, I mean, these guys, hyper-personalization is huge to them, which means movement of data, handling data, securing data. How can I help in security and adopting best practices for that?
Sure. So I think Vishal, I just quickly want to touch upon the personalization piece, right? I think that's been so critical for all the fintech companies to really grow, which is to essentially customize all these financial services products based on the end user's requirement. I think and this is kind of relevant in almost every vertical that you look. I mean, wealth tech, insure tech, or lending, or any space that you actually look at. But I think at the base for all of this, and the way we're actually supporting companies is actually with an identity store, which is where you actually store all this particular information about the user, and then you can essentially run all this, AI and ML and stuff like that, and essentially come with risk models or credit scoring models, things like that, right? So that's one, obviously, a big place. That a big place that we can actually help a lot of fintech companies with. But what that also actually means is that becomes like a hotspot for attackers, and I think that's where we were just talking about the kind of trends that we're actually seeing. So I think, look, it's a very broad topic, but I think I'll try and actually touch upon like broad 2 or 3 categories that I'm hoping will resonate with everyone. One is obviously all the attacks on just the API stack, right? I think it could either be downtime, data theft, credential abuse. I think those are all very dominant trends that have like really shot up ever since COVID, right? Both with actually COVID and I think with the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing. So we're seeing a pretty substantial increase. I mean, the numbers are all there, like 2x on credential abuse attempts, 40% increase in application layer attacks, bunch of things like that. So that's one full stack that very prominent. I think the second one is more interesting, which is, I think attackers have come to realize that most of the organizations with all this heavy duty security infrastructure in your origin or in your data center. And that's why they're actually shifting their attack surface now to the browser. Now, there's a very prominent attack called web skimming. To give you an analogy, think of your classic ATM skimming, where they put like a hardware device in your ATM and try and read the credit card details. Think of the exact same thing happening on your browser, just at scale, without all that hardware, heavy lifting. And that's really happening as of today. And what essentially attackers are doing is that they're injecting malicious code into kind of first-party or third-party scripts. And then as users enter their personal information, these scripts just take, the data off and actually send it over the network. In fact, there was this one advisory that I think that Visa made, I think, about a particular attack called Pipka. And it sounds something like as a future sci-fi movie, but essentially what it does is when you load the browser, it calls another fourth-party script, it exfiltrates all the data, and then it auto-destructs itself, which means when you try to do a forensic later, you're not going to find anything about it. But guess what? You've just been breached. So I think we can see the attack vector moving from not just from your original data center, but to the client as well. And I think the last one, which is a very post-COVID phenomenon, is really the attack surface increasing because of people working remotely. And that I think is a whole new dimension to security. And people are fundamentally rethinking about changing their architectures. And I think and it's very evident especially when you look at something like phishing or malware attack, we're seeing like 5-6x increase in phishing attacks because attackers realize that at the end of the day, people are working remotely. People are using the same machine to access both their corporate applications and internet. And hence, it's actually so much more easier. And all they have to do is find one weak link. And the moment they do that, they are able to kind of penetrate the corporate network. And which is why we see a lot of customers actually moving from the classic kind of perimeter security model to more of a zero trust security model. So I think at a broad level, these are like the top 2 or 3 trends that we see from a cybersecurity thing, which I think will be very, which I think will be more bigger as we go along.
Okay, great point. Lizzie, moving on to you. I want to talk about life during COVID. This is a question for all of you. Talents during COVID. A lot of engineers are graduating are, very curious as what's going to happen to their lives. And also policy regulation. How's that changed after COVID to benefit all of you? Okay. You can start wherever you want.
Talent. That's probably still the single biggest challenge for all of us, and it hasn't gotten easier. I can tell you that. So it's good news for graduates. What's happened is actually the world has got more global as businesses have gone remote, right? So you're finding that actually we're all now competing in a genuinely global talent pool, and that was kind of always the case, but I think it's really hit home in the last few months. So I would say, for everybody graduating right now, it's going to be a tough couple of years, but the future is bright. And you now have the opportunity to work on anything that's happening anywhere in the world. And India is one of the most attractive places for people to hire from still. And so we have even lost a couple of people in recent months, but they went to like Facebook, and we were like, actually, that's quite cool. So, fair enough. So the situation is really interesting. But I would say, there's never been a better time to really upskill and become really kind of global in your outlook about your career.
And the future and the compliance growth for you next 18 months?
Yeah, massive, a huge amount of demand from our customers, our retailers, our manufacturers, and even now banks. We've always worked on a model where we're almost like a service provider to banks and NBFCs in this country. So from day one, we've had to have an extremely rigorous approach to compliance and regulatory interface. It's not optional for us. We can't say when we're big enough, because we wouldn't have been able to do any business without being, the most nimble and compliant company in our space. For us, things like KYC are always a real pain point, but we've now made that our forte. We have a kind of KYC super group who are empowered to build whatever new KYC solutions they can think of. And I think we have about 7 or 8 running at the moment right now. So we try and make these challenges into opportunities. And that's where we've managed to really deepen our relationships with banks in the last 6 months. Yeah.
And you as a leader, how did these COVID times change you?
Oh, deep question. No one asked that. Actually, I'm going to sound really cheesy. We had a comedian do a stand-up session on Friday, and she said, "Who in this group has enjoyed the last few months?" And I shot my hand up. And she said, "What's wrong with you? Why have you enjoyed it?" And it's because I genuinely think that challenges make you stronger and better. And, I run marathons for fun. And I do that because I love that feeling after a really long run where like everything's aching. I just get this buzz, and this has felt like a really, really long marathon. But the future's bright. So yeah, I like pain.
That's great. Sampath, I know we did an Instagram live. That was a fun thing that we did in between. What's happened in the last 6 months in your company? What do you expect from regulation? The kind of talent engineers are very curious that they want to work, but hiring has been frozen in many of these IT services companies. I tell them that please go join a startup, right? So your thoughts, please.
Well, like everybody else, all of us are working from home. In fact, I started coming to office from last week onwards. So we are shut indefinitely working from office. So everybody kind of working from home. Most of them had gone back to hometown, right? We did some bit of activities to kind of help them ease up their working environment at home. So that's one. The other thing, I think generally in the first couple of months of lockdown, I think I've been hearing a lot about mental breakdown and all, because home essentially for Indians is not a very palatable place to work from. Right? Like, see, I am now working from office, right? So I think that kind of issues kind of crept on the hiring side. I think this is the moment, right? Like when I think Archit hinted as well that we are seeing a wave of digitization across the length and breadth of any kind of consumer or B2B business, right? Now to kind of take advantage of the situation, we need folks across the length and breadth of the company, be it like engineers, designers, and all. Last thing I want to add, I think there is a growing need, and I think we feel it, at least our end, is gone are the days when the engineer can say, I just want to code, right? I think now engineers have to be mindful about the user experience. I am not asking them to kind of open Figma tomorrow and start sketching out, right? But I think they have to be mindful about the end user experience, about what the end user is going to feel. Because as I mentioned earlier and alluded to the fact that a lot of new consumers or businesses are coming on the internet for the first time who have erstwhile used the global products.
Correct.
Right. And I think we missed the mark thinking I'm going to just build MVP and ship out, and maybe your early stage company can do it. But if you're slightly more evolved, you just cannot miss the mark of wowing a customer by giving a very good user experience. And no, user experience is not a designer or a product manager's job anymore. Right? And that's what I personally feel. So young folks who are joining the startups, if you are joining the engineering force, you need to be mindful about that part of the whole process as well. User experience. Yeah.
Now, anything quickly from the regulation? Anything should change for
Oh,
fintech? All well?
Changes every day. If I just go to RBI side, I'll see the regulation. So I think see, we have come to an era where for the next decade or so we'll be living in the era of regulation. This is the
Wow.
cost of doing business, right?
Yeah.
And I've been vocal about this a decade back when we used to tell consumers about or merchants about internet use करके आप बेच सकते हो. To now businesses are coming and saying, how can I use internet to sell more? In 10 years now, regulators also kind of being mindful about the fact that a lot of miscreants are happening across the length and breadth. So we have to be honored that we are living in an era that regulation is going to be a mainstay. Allocate a certain percentage of a cost to regulation. I think Lisa is always smiling. She knows
That's
what
great
she has
That's
to
great
do, and so
advice.
is Rahul. So the fact is we have to, right? And this is the cost of doing business in a growing MAU-driven short-term economy, right? Hopefully, all this translates to MAU ARPU at some point of time where all of us make a lot of money, right?
Lizzie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, right? If we can do it faster and quicker and better, we win. And we saw, by the way, like during this moratorium, a lot of banks really struggled to get product out quickly enough, regulatory product, right? So the RBI announced you can restructure loans, but no bank could actually restructure a loan because they then had to go and build a restructuring product. We could do that in like 24 hours. And I'm sure everybody here can, right? We have tech teams and product teams that are that capable. So turn regulation into an opportunity, I would say. We need more reg tech in this country.
Well said. Ravish, to you, building Khatabok the last 6 months, how has it changed you as a leader and your thoughts for the future quickly? And same question to Rahul Archit. My team's saying that, there's some live going on next, so we got to close quickly. Go on.
Sure. I think my majority of my learnings came from my previous journey at housing than at Khatabuk. Primarily around, I would say, a better cash flow management. And so, yeah, I think that is what I'm implementing at Khatabuk.
And you as a leader, what are you going to do next 6 months, 12 months? What do you expect?
So next 6 to 12 months, our focus is on digitizing the other flows that are happening inside the shop besides the Bai Khata. So a couple of exciting apps are slated to launch as part of our ecosystem. Focusing on that.
Okay, Rahul, to you, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think for the entire last few the COVID months or the entire last few months has been, I think, learning both from a human perspective aspect and from the business aspect. If I probably think from the business aspect, I think it's just about learning few things, right? How marketing is going to be important in the sales part of it, right? Because you can't really reach out to the person, the merchants or the customers in person, especially for enterprise side of business. Also, how to kind of have a very, very strong sales focus in this environment where the people have to sell on a Zoom call, right? How do you do that? How do you kind of engage with the different stakeholders in the business? So I think how can you very systematically, etc. I think that's one part of the learning, definitely, for sure. The other part is definitely on the human side of it. While everybody is working from home, how do you keep them more engaged? How do you kind of really keep loving Razorpay as a company as much that they were doing it, given that the interactions, the human interactions has reduced. So I think on that also, how do you drive it in terms of having right forums, different sessions? How do you have like few days which are no meeting days to make sure people relax? How do you make sure you ensure people take leaves to charge? And all those things, I think from a human aspect has been really good learning. But yeah, broadly about this. And going ahead, I think overall, like everybody said, from a fintech perspective, the growth is substantial. It's just about from Razorpay's perspective, how do we really make this growth profitable, as Sampath said, and also kind of how do we scale our other new businesses, capital and neobanking, as we've been able to scale payments.
That's amazing. And the only thing real in life is death and taxes. So I'll give the final word to our man Archit here. Okay. So we cannot escape you, man. So what's the future? What's the future? Go file your tax now? Or what do you think is going to happen? Go on.
So the government gave you a month more in case 31st December now instead of 30th November.
Oh, are you serious? It's not 30th November?
No.
Yeah, they gave you a month more, man. So you have 30 more days.
Thank you. That's the first best news I got today. Thank you.
But interest is going to get charged, huh?
So we're going to put this in the panel too. That's true, man. Thanks for that good news.
Get it done now. So always get it done now.
After log into ClearTax then.
By the way, he's also selling, by the way. So take care. Okay. I'm kidding. Go on, Archit bhai, go on.
No, but I know Harshil and team use at Razorpay use ClearTax a lot. So they use it. So
and you're also the YC guys calling me and saying, when do you see Archit take the next step? Seriously. Okay, go on. Okay, go on.
Yeah, so good one. So I think just the COVID question was very deep. I think I resonated with what everybody said. For us, what we did, I think April, May, we actually since the lockdown happened, all revenue stopped for a bit, right? So that was very, very interesting. So we actually paused on hiring in April, and we were okay, let's look at cash flow. Let's look at how's the company, and are we thinking something wrong, or this is a good reset moment, right? We are all working from home for the first time, and all of that. I think we came out very, very strong because we understood this will accelerate digital. And since that time, we have onboarded 150 people completely remotely. It's been a learning experience. A few things. One has been culture was very tribal and oral, and so getting it to be a written or
how do you codify it? Very difficult.
How do you codify it, right? So that's been one of the big learnings. How do you codify culture in a startup in our collective scale here, folks who are present here, right? The founders here and or the leaders here. And the second part is this is a very, very strong opportunity for digital companies just scaling well, because I think for us a couple of M&A things have gone well. We're literally doubling the engineering team size at this time. So the acceleration moment in this time is very, very beautiful, and this is a very good flux event. So I think displacement is happening a lot. So using that displacement on customer behavior, on behavior at businesses, behavior within is very, very powerful. So I think just getting accelerating rapidly is something I look forward to. At a personal level, I felt as multiple folks here said, and Rahul especially said, I think it's all about the people now. I think this complete work from home, remote scenario has completely changed the way we've been working. I think in the office, it was far easier to build connect and just be on that journey. And I think this is completely different. And I think we are all figuring out the playbooks. And so that's the big thing. I think
that's true.
So my takeaway would be it's the people, man.
Well, I hope people watching this realize that they can buy at Zest Money. They could have a business running on Khatabook. They could go to Rahul and Sampath, InstaMojo and Razorpay and get some financial tools done. And with Archit, they have to file taxes. Don't go to your CAs. Go to Archit. Okay. And I wish you entrepreneurs all the best and success. And I thank Akamai for bringing us together. And I hope at some point of time I go for a marathon run with Lizzie, and I hope all of us do that, because we are sick and tired of sitting at home. And like Sampath said, home is not a palatable place to do these business meetings, right? Sumant, final word to you. Go on. Thank you very much.
I think I completely echo what Archit just said. I think purely from an Akamai standpoint, I think the big two themes are obviously growth and cybersecurity. I think we'll see a lot of it over the next 12, 20 months. But I think to Archit's point about a lot of opportunity, I definitely want to touch upon I think the regulatory support in terms of regulatory sandbox, right? I think that's a great place for actually a lot of these innovations and new growth opportunities actually that we're coming our way. For example, in the InsurTech space, now they're talking about using IoT or wearable devices to get more information about, healthcare of the users and then have policies accordingly. So I feel over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see a lot more, because we have the right regulatory support as well in some sense to actually try out these innovations actually at scale. And I think that just means growth for, all the fintech companies and Akamai too.
Okay, guys, again, for all you entrepreneurs, don't write us off just yet because we have still scratched the surface. FinTech is the future, but taxes will forever remain the future. Okay, and thank you very much, guys. I'll see you in a bit. Bye. Thank you.